Hello, hello. Hi, John, and hi, everyone tuning in to our Harbor YouTube channel where we recap our Thursday night gatherings and offer some reflections from the night. So last night we finished our series on Psalms. We have gone through it all with the series. We have lamented, we have raged, we have cried out for justice. We've seen these Psalms as songs and also prayers. And last night we reflected on Psalm 23. And before we went into it, we had just a wonderful sharing time from someone in our community, Larry, and he reflected on his own story. So if you know Larry, it was just beautiful to see how his story connects with this psalm. And I would just invite you to reach out to him. And if you missed it, to hear more. It was really, really sweet and really powerful, and probably a story that many of us could relate to. So it was wonderful. And then Larry actually taught on Psalm 23. And John, could you give us a little bit of some insight on what did Larry do last night?
Yeah, so it really was the night of Larry Houk. So I'm sorry to anyone who missed it because Larry is wonderful and it was a great night. Like you mentioned, he both shared his part of his own story and then took us through this little teaching on Psalm 23, which I won't like rehash, all the little great tidbits that Larry gave us, but basically, Psalm 23, incredibly familiar. We've all heard it many times. We've seen it cross-stitched on walls. I mean, it's everywhere. Um, what Larry did was kind of take us through verse by verse, pretty much, and looking at some of the key words and key phrases. Larry, for those who don't know Larry or know this about Larry, he's a real student of the Bible, and he leads a Bible study. He actually studies regularly under a rabbi, and so he had insights about some of the Hebrew words and phrases. He had insights about some of the contexts in the ancient Near East, where this text was written, and what that would have added to the meaning for the original readers and listeners of this work of art. And so it was just a lot of cool insights, like phrases that we may have taken for granted in Psalm 23 before, or that we may have assigned a particular meaning to because we've been taught in a very westernized American 21st century kind of mindset about what some of these words and phrases mean. We maybe had new meanings now to consider. So it was a really rich time of discussion and learning at Harbor.
Hmm, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm looking down at some of the notes I took last night from what he said, and I would write the word that the psalm would use and then kind of a translation that he gave us. And it was really rich. And I wrote down after green pastures and still waters, and I wrote they equal comfort. He said we need food and water so we can rest in our bodies. And
Mm.
then as I'm looking through the words to follow, there's shadow of death, there's table to practice inviting, like sitting down with our enemy, God's goodness, which brings life. So there's all these like rich phrases to follow. And at the beginning, there's we need food and water so we can rest in our bodies. And I just struck me that there's something actually like really profound about the psychology of this psalm too, of like God like inviting us, the mystery inviting us into like rest and nourishment so that we could grow in our capacity to even sit down at a table with our enemies. And I hadn't thought of that before until just now. And yeah, there's a lot from this psalm that I'm sure I'm going to continue to reflect on and come back to from some of the insights that Larry shared. What
Mhm.
stood out to you last night, John? Anything in your breakout room or just in conversation?
Yeah, our breakout room had a really great conversation, and I think the main things we were grappling with in our group discussion were like which parts of this psalm tonight and Larry's teachings resonated with us and maybe shifted some of our understandings of what this psalm might mean. And I'll just pick two of the aspects of the psalm that really stood out to me and the other folks in my breakout room. One, the number one by far was this phrase in the psalm. The psalmist is saying to God, "You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies." And there's one way of reading this that may have some validity, I don't know, which is like almost gloating, right? Like this, like you're going to prepare this banquet that I'm going to be eating, and all my enemies are going to have to watch, right? It's like this victorious kind of but Larry really invited us to read this in a much more peacemaking way of God preparing a table for me and my enemies to eat at together. And I think he even said the phrase at one point, the only thing standing between us and our enemies in this vision of God is a table. And it's just really, really good. And so we really wrestled with that and peace between enemies. We talked a lot about that in our breakout room. Another phrase that really stood out to folks in the way that Larry presented it as well was the phrase, "Your rod and staff, they comfort me." For so long, several of us in our breakout room kind of admitted that in our other old religious contexts, a lot of us have been in evangelical contexts, we came to merge this verse with other verses about like spare not the rod on the child or whatever. The idea that like the rod and the staff are disciplinary tools and that God is like basically treating us harshly like the stupid sheep that we are, and that we're supposed to like it, right? Like it comforts us when God has to forcibly or violently correct us in some way. And the contortions of mind and spirit we had to do to like read the psalm that way for so many years. And for Larry, this was a very straightforward, how does a shepherd use the staff and the rod with sheep? The staff rescues them when they're like falling over a ledge or something, and the rod defends them and protects them when other predators come along to attack them. So instead, the rod and the staff become these tools of rescue and defense and protection, and it's just a totally different way of viewing the way God relates to us and what God wants for us and from us and in us. So that was a pretty rich conversation as well.
Oh, some great reflections, and yeah, we'll keep reflecting and wrestling on all the insights we learned from the series on the Psalms. And yeah, we're so grateful for Larry inviting us into deeper context of the ancient text. Well, thanks, Jon, for chatting.
Thank you. It's been a good series of Psalms conversations, and I'm excited for what's next at Harbor.